Hello students, welcome to my educational channel EasyEd. In our last videos, we have completed our first chapter, that is Living World. Those who have not watched those videos can watch it on my YouTube channel EasyEd. Now today we will start second chapter, that is Biological Classification. So as we studied in earlier chapter that because of the vast variety of the living organisms, to study them there existed a need for classifying them. And how it was done? Based on their characters. On the basis of the characters possessed by the living organisms, they were classified into various groups. Now, attempts have been made from the early times to study these organisms, and in this context, in classification of the living organisms, Aristotle was the earliest to attempt the classification on the scientific basis. And what he did? He used simple morphological characters and classified the living organisms as plants and animals, and among them he classified plants simply as herbs, shrubs and trees. You have studied about them in the earlier classes, small classes, that plants are of three types: herbs, shrubs and trees. So, and animals he classified simply as those with red blood and others without red blood. That means Aristotle was the earliest to classify the living organisms. And what was the basis of his classification? It was based on the simple morphological characters. He classified plants into three groups: herbs, shrubs and trees, and animals into two groups: those having red blood and those without red blood. Now what happened? This classification could not justify the diverse plants and organisms because there were many characters, there were many criteria which have to be considered, and there were many characters in the particular group which was not only morphological or on simple basis, but they exhibited other differences too. Only morphological characters could not be considered for classification of such a wide variety of organisms. So, this classification was not considered in future to classify various organisms. Earlier, it was a simple classification, but because of diversity, so many characters exhibited in difference, this classification could not be considered for further studies, and so it was not accepted much. Then came the Linnaeus time. In the time of Linnaeus, Carl Linnaeus, you all know him. Carl Linnaeus gave two kingdom classification. He gave two kingdom classification in which he grouped all the living organisms into two groups, Plantae and Animalia. Broadly, what was it? Plantae contained all the plants and Animalia contained all the animals. Again, what happened? This simple classification of living organisms into plants and animals could not be considered. Why? Because there were many organisms which did not fall into either category, means either in plants or in animals. There was a vast variety, and there were many organisms which exhibited some such different characters which could not be considered under plants, and neither they could not be considered animals. For example, if you might be knowing something about prokaryotes, eukaryotes, all you will study this further. But for right now, that this two kingdom classification could not distinguish between eukaryotes and prokaryotes. You know, prokaryotes are very simple organisms. without the proper cellular organization. They are simply made up of a cell, and eukaryotes have well organized cell. So this classification could not distinguish eukaryotes and prokaryotes. Again, it could not distinguish between unicellular and multicellular organisms. Some organisms are made up of single cell, they are called as unicellular. At the same time, many organisms are there which are made up of many cells. So they follow in both plants and animals. As I told you, about eukaryotes and prokaryotes, there are prokaryotes in plants also, prokaryotes in animals also. Similarly, this classification could not distinguish between photosynthetic and non-photosynthetic organisms. It was a simple classification of plantae and animalia, but biology is a science of exceptions. There are many exceptions found everywhere. So, plantae, as we all know, they are autotrophic, they are photosynthetic, but here also there are some plants or some organisms which are not photosynthetic, they cannot prepare their food. So, all these criteria were considered, and there was a large number of discriminations. There are inacceptance for there, and though this classification was used for a long time, but it was found inadequate as it could not group the organisms properly. Go a simple look through a limitations of this classification. What is that? There are a large number of organisms which do not fall into the either category. It could not distinguish between eukaryotes and prokaryotes, between unicellular and multicellular, between photosynthetic and non-photosynthetic. So these are the limitations of two kingdom classification. Question can be asked, what were the limitations? And so, though it was used for a long time, but was not found inadequate. But was found inadequate, not found adequate. Now what the situation was, there was a need felt for what? To consider some more characters. Some more characters which made the life organisms complex, which arose complexity in the living organisms, such as cell structure, nature of cell wall, mode of nutrition, their habitat, their methods of reproduction, their evolutionary relationships, etc. All these characters were considered because of the limitations we saw above. Why these limitations occurred? Because all these characters, cell structure, nature of cell wall, mode of nutrition of the organisms, habitat of the organisms, methods of reproduction, evolutionary relationships, etc. Because of all these above limitations, the need was felt to consider some more characters, these characters besides basic or morphological characters. Now, because of all these limitations, because of studies going through for the new characters, what happened? These classification systems, as you studied now from Aristotle to Linnaeus, still it changes over time. Why? Because of the change in criteria. The process of classification or the classification system changed over time. Why? Because of the change in the criteria. Some more criteria were need to be considered, and so two kingdom classification also was not found adequate. Then a new classification was given by R.H. Whittaker. And what was this classification? This was five kingdom classification. It was five kingdom classification in which all the living organisms were divided into five groups. And what were those groups? that they were means 5 kingdoms. The 5 kingdom classification means organisms were divided into 5 main kingdoms. And what were these kingdoms? Kingdom Monera, Kingdom Protista, Kingdom Fungi, Kingdom Plantae, and Kingdom Animalia. These were the 5 kingdoms: Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. 5 kingdom classification was given by Whittaker, which considered what criteria? The main criteria of 5 kingdom classification were what? Cell structure, body organization of the organisms, mode of nutrition you can understand well, mode of nutrition, reproduction, and phylogenetic relationships. Phylogenetic relationships means evolutionary relationship. See what happened there in our previous classifications. What happened? There were many discrepancies. Some bacteria, which you all might be knowing, or you will study all this further, that bacteria is a prokaryote. Understand, listen properly. Bacteria is a prokaryote, and blue green algae is also a prokaryote. Now fungi, which is non photosynthetic, it does not contain a cellulose cell wall. All these were grouped in Plantae. Why? Because Plantae was considered to be the kingdom which contained all the organisms having cell wall. As we studied earlier, that Linnaeus divided the organisms into 2 main groups, Plantae and Animalia. So Plantae included all the organisms having cell wall, and Animalia included the organisms without cell wall. But what happened? Many organisms were there which had cell wall, but that have many different characteristics because of their cell structure, because of their mode of nutrition, because of their body organization, like that. So they were, though grouped in Plantae, were not like plants alike. So the process changes further depending upon the new criteria, new characters observed, and evolutionary relationships, like that. And so finally came a 5 kingdom classification proposed by Whittaker, in which we have all the organisms divided into 5 main kingdoms, which is Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. And briefly here I will explain you what are included under this. All this you will study further. Kingdom Monera included all the prokaryotes. Okay, prokaryotes are very simple organisms having a very simple cell structure. Then Protista, from Protista started eukaryotes. Okay, Protista, it started eukaryotes. All the prokaryotes were in Monera. Since Protista, we have eukaryotes, have some specific cellular structure, and they were included under Protista. But which type of eukaryotes were in Protista? Unicellular eukaryotes. So Protista included unicellular prokaryotes. Then third kingdom, fungi, it was eukaryote. Some were unicellular, many were multicellular, but the difference was that the uniqueness of this kingdom was that they contained cell wall, but they were not photosynthetic. They were not autotrophic. Fungi, you all know, are heterotrophic mode of nutrition. And why they are heterotrophic? Why plants are autotrophic? Plants are autotrophic because they undergo photosynthetic. How do they undergo photosynthetic? Because they have chloroplast in them. This fungi does not contain chloroplast. And one more specific character in plants, The cell wall is made up of cellulose. In fungi, cell wall is present, but that is not made up of cellulose. It is made up of chitin. So fungi, being similar to plants, was kept in a totally separate kingdom because it was not photosynthetic. It does not contain cellulose in its cell wall. So fungi was kept in a different kingdom, separate kingdom. Then fourth kingdom was plantae, which includes all the plants. Specific character, that cell wall is made up of cellulose and they are having chloroplast, and so they are autotrophic in nature. And finally, the kingdom Animalia, which included all the animals. You know the characteristic of animals, they do not have cell wall. Okay, they do not have cell wall and they have a heterotrophic mode of nutrition. All these kingdoms you are going to study in elaborated form further. So here I am briefly explaining you this. So remember this 5 kingdom classification in order from primitive organisms and advancing to the advanced ones. First is Monera, second is Protista, third is fungi, plantae and Animalia. I told you that the criteria was evolutionary. This is the evolutionary hierarchy. So this has to be learned and remembered in sequence. Now have a fast look on the characteristics of the 5 kingdoms. I have made a table for you all for the easy understanding. Characteristics which were considered for 5 kingdoms. What were the characters? And you all know what were the 5 kingdoms. Now, first character we will consider cell type. Cell type in Monera, they are prokaryotic. Just now I told you Monera was prokaryotic and from Protista started eukaryotic. Okay, Monera is prokaryotic and Protista eukaryotes, fungi eukaryotes, plantae eukaryotes and Animalia eukaryotes. Now second character which was considered was cell wall. Cell wall in Monera, they have cell wall, but that is non-cellulose and they are made up of some, they have chemicals. So they are grouped into Monera because they are lacking cellulose. They are not in plantae. Now, cell wall in Protista is present in some but absent in some. Okay. You will study all these things further. Fungi, I just told you, cell wall is made up of chitin. Plantae, cell wall is made up of cellulose. And in Animalia, cell wall is absent. Then we come to the third character, that is nuclear membrane. Nuclear membrane is absent in prokaryotes, a specific character of prokaryotes without nuclear membrane. And in all the eukaryotes, proper nucleus with nuclear membrane is present. In all of them, it is present. Then comes body organization. I was talking about unicellular and multicellular. So all the monerans are cellular. Protista, body organization, cellular means made up of cells and they are primitive, so maybe of single cell. From fungi, we have multicellular and in plantae, more developed multicellular tissue system, organ system. That means many cells form tissue, tissues form organs. In animal, there are tissue, organs as well as organ systems. Okay. Now another is mode of nutrition. Monerans are autotrophic as well as heterotrophic. Some can prepare their food, some cannot. Protista again autotrophic and heterotrophic. Fungi totally heterotrophic. Plantae autotrophic and Animalia heterotrophic. Okay. So this was our 5 kingdom classification, and 5 kingdom classification is widely accepted and is continued till now. Now next we will continue our next video. Please like, share and subscribe my YouTube channel. Thank you.